Well, hello there to all the good people of Ohio and beyond. This is Aaron Knapp, and you're tuned into Unplugged, broadcasting without permission. This is a place where the truth gets louder and we dig deeper, and where we always remember be lawful, not awful. If you want the full stories, the documents, the videos, and everything they don't want you to see, head on over to Aaron Knapp, unplugged.com. My new home for every investigation, every episode, and every update. And while you're here, be sure to like the video, follow the page, and hit subscribe. And share this with someone who needs the truth. We're building something real here. We're building something fearless. And we're doing it together. Welcome to Unplugged. Let's kick this thing off.
Plug with Knapp. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Knapp. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script.
Well, good evening there, Lorain. I should say good morning. Bright and early here, 1:02 a.m. Lorain County. Anybody watching now, later? I've been putting out some stories tonight, and I kind of promised some of the folks I would do a podcast tonight. So here we are. Whether or not some of those folks have been able to stick around or not, that's a completely different story, because this is kind of a late podcast, but we'll get through it, and hopefully give you something fun or interesting to watch when you get home from the bar. But tonight we're going to talk about when enforcement becomes targeting and the record starts to talk. Tonight's going to get a little serious, folks. We're going to get in some in-depth moments, but we're going to cover pretty much, I'm going to try to cover everything that's been going on in the last couple of weeks. It's been pretty hectic and insane, but there are moments in public accountability like work where the issue is no longer about one incident, one meeting, or one person. The issue becomes a pattern. It becomes the way all decisions are made, the timing of those decisions, and whether the same individuals are treated differently depending on who they are, what they're saying, and what they're exposing. Tonight's episode is not about speculation or accusations. It's about a record. The record as it exists right now, and the legal position that the record places the city of Lorain in. Now, I know that, speaking of Lorain, that she's going to later watch this, and it's going to be emailed over to the city, and that's fine. I do, as I said to Commissioner Gallagher, say, I wasn't hiding behind the pole, it was just there, but it's the best angle without me walking in front to get video. For the people that don't follow the YouTube page, which, as you see on the bottom here, I'm putting out their meeting information, their YouTube page information. For those of you that don't go to the county meetings, you can at least subscribe to their YouTube page. They've only got like 600-700 followers. So with a county this big, we should have 60,000, 80,000, 100,000, 200,000 followers on that link for their YouTube showing all their meetings. If you're not going to the meetings, at least you can do is watch them. But so at the center of everything is a simple question that the courts are going to ask when they evaluate government conduct. And that was the action taken because of what happened, or was it taken because of whom was involved? That question is the dividing line between lawful enforcement and unconstitutional retaliation, folks. And the government has the authority to maintain order, to enforce rules, and to prosecute violations. What it does not have the authority to do is target individuals because they are critical, because they are requesting records, or because they are involved in litigation against the government. When that line is crossed, the issue is no longer about policy, right? It really becomes a constitutional question. And that's kind of where we're at right now. When you look at what's happened, in the and just the petty matter and the way that they trumped that one around, you look at the timeline, and it raises some serious questions that can't be ignored. There was a public meeting, there was an incident, there was a subsequent charge. That's the official narrative. But what now exists alongside that narrative are statements captured at or around that same time that describe internal discussions about how to deal with that individual. Well, when conversations occur about how to proceed against a person, at the same time that enforcement decisions are being made, the issue is no longer just what happened in the room, right? The issue becomes whether the outcome was predetermined. Courts do not ignore timing. Timing is often the strongest evidence of intent. What makes this even more significant is that the statements that exist are not abstract opinions, right? They are statements relaying what was said by others, including references to what was being discussed inside government offices. They include references to emails being circulated, concerns about accusations tied to executive sessions, discussions about how information was being used in response to public reporting. These are not isolated comments, folks. These are pieces of a broader picture that show awareness, communication, and reaction across multiple individuals and multiple levels. And when those pieces begin to align and actions that were taken, they become relevant in a way that goes far beyond the conversation. Now, you place what happened with Garon next to what they've now done with me, and the city of Lorain issued a directive banning me from municipal property. Not a single location, not City Hall, not, wherever Ray is, not a specific event, but municipal property. That's a sweeping restriction that directly affects access to government, access to records, and the ability to participate in public process. Now, when a government takes that kind of action, the law requires more than just a general statement about, maintaining order. It requires clear authority, defined limits, and procedural safeguards, folks. The document that was issued does not identify a specific statute authorizing a ban of that scope. It does not define how long that restriction lasts. It doesn't appear to have even a clear process for review or appeal, which the law requires. And when those elements are missing, the issue is not just administrative, it becomes a due process concern. There's also the First Amendment dimension that can't be ignored. Public buildings, council chambers, municipal offices are places where citizens engage with their government when access to those spaces are restricted, especially for someone engaged in public records activity, reporting and litigation. Courts look very closely at whether the restriction is tied to conduct or whether it's tied to speech. And if the restriction is motivated by speech, criticism, or exposure to government activity, that's where the retaliation claim arises. The Constitution does not allow for the government to restrict access to silence a critic or limit their oversight. When you step back and you look at both those two incidences together, the situations, what starts to stand out is that it's not the individual facts of each case, but the overlap. The same offices appear, the same types of decisions are made. There are references to communications between council, the law department, and law enforcement. There are statements suggesting that people are aware of what is being said and what's being done across departments. That's where the legal concept of coordination becomes so important. Independent decisions made by separate actors are one thing. Coordination actions informed by shared discussions are something else entirely. You see, that's when there's evidence that multiple parts of the government are actually acting in coordination with shared knowledge and shared purpose. That's when the courts start to ask questions, and you should too, on whether those actions are truly independent or part of a broader response by these government actors. So, there are also statements within the record that raise concerns about pressure and influence. Statements about what someone was told they could say or couldn't say. Statements expressing a concern about being placed in a position that could cause harm if they spoke. Statements suggesting that decisions were being made behind the scenes that affect what individuals felt they could do. Now, the law doesn't require an explicit threat for intimidation to be a concern. If the circumstances would make a reasonable person hesitate to speak, hesitate to cooperate, or hesitate to tell the truth, that's something the courts consider. when those concerns exist alongside actual government action, they become even more significant. I strongly suggest you guys offer some settlements to certain people. That's why the record is so important right now, because there are specific questions that can only be answered through documents. What emails were sent on that day of the Petty incident? What communications occurred between council members and the law department? Whether law enforcement was contacted before decisions were made? What directives, if any, were given regarding the charges? Whether policies were discussed that differ from what is actually done? These are not, broad fishing questions. These are targeted requests that go directly to how decisions were being made. Now, if those requests exist, they will either confirm the decision were made based on facts, or they will reveal inconsistencies that raise further questions. If the records don't exist, that raises its own set of concerns about how significant decisions were made without documentation. Now, we have a copy of the Make It Happen video or an email. I did request it again, but I requested it through official legal channels at this point for chain of evidence. I also requested the emails that were sent prior to that were leaked, and that they actually say McCann telling people you can't do what you're doing. Now, I'm not sure if we got those officially through the city, so that's why I requested them, because I want chain of evidence. I don't just want, willy-nilly however we got it. And I know one of you guys from the city is going to watch this, so just so you know, that's the provenance of this. That's why I'm asking for them again. I want them legitimately. And the third one is the one Garon's been asking for, and his attorney's been asking for a while, which is the letter that McCann sent to Joel Arredondo. There was a communication there. And that's then you failed to provide that. So whatever. But the legal position that the city is in right now is pretty serious. They may think that they're winning. They may think, oh, we're going to just do dismissal after dismissal. And I will point out really quick that, they're going to report in Monday's meeting that they've kicked me out of about the lawsuit, the gun lawsuit being, whatever, tossed, as he called it, but subject to appeal. Before Monday even comes along, it's already been appealed. So I can say that the appeal is already on the docket. So celebrate all you want. The appeal is already there because we do have standing, and the judge just failed to look at the appropriate areas. She just believed what you guys had to say. Now, the legal position the city is in is serious because not any single piece of evidence, but because of how they fit together. There are statements, there are actions, there are timelines, there are overlapping actors. That combination is what courts evaluate when they look at claims involving retaliation, selective enforcement, and conspiracy. You don't need one piece of evidence that proves everything. That matters. What matters is that the totality of evidence that allows a reasonable inference that actions were taken for improper reasons. Now, that's the standard that matters at this stage, because we're not talking about reaching conclusions tonight. It's just about recognizing where the record is and what it shows so far. There are active cases, there are ongoing public records requests, and there are documents that have been produced and others that have not. There are that are now known. The next step in any case like this is not argument. That's not why I'm here tonight. I'm going to talk about a whole bunch more stuff than just this, by the way. Just getting this out of the way early. It is completion of the record. Because once the record's complete, there's no more room for speculation. The facts will either support the actions that were taken or they won't. In the end, this is about accountability. It's about whether decisions were made based on conduct or whether they were based on the individuals. Or as Ray would say, the asker, not the ask. It's about whether government authority was even exercised properly or whether it was used in a way that raises constitutional concerns. Now, it is about making sure that, that the record, the actual record, is complete and available for review, because that's where the truth is found, not in statements, not in narratives, but in the documents, the timing, the evidence that shows what really happened. So, you know, that's going to bring us to the first little stop break that we have here that we usually do for our first ad. So we're going to do a quick ad here, and we'll get right back to the play. I'm going to actually pop a few things up here. I want to remind you guys about your city, county, or your county commissioner meetings. They are there's no reason that they should have that few of subscribers in a county this size. There's just not. How do you explain that? I've got almost half as many. I mean, I'm getting to that number. I'm over halfway to that number. I think I've got like almost 500, and they've got like 7 or 8. That's unacceptable in this county. So everybody go out. You see it down here on the bottom. You're gonna see it. It says my scroll bar there has the commissioner's YouTube page. Put it there for everybody to see, so you guys can add it. And in the meantime, we're gonna run an actual ad. Well, it's not really; it's my city council ad, and then we will be right back. Hey there, folks. Aaron here at Unplugged with Aaron Knapp. I want to give you a quick reminder for everyone watching that the city of Lorain holds its regular city council meetings on the first and third Monday of every month. And those meetings are not just for council members, they are for residents. If you care about what happens in your city, and if you speak or want to speak on an issue, ask a question, or simply be present and informed, showing up matters. Participation matters. Even sitting in the room and listening matters. You do not need to be an expert on any of this. You do not need permission to care. You do not need to do anything other than just show up. So check the agenda, folks. Mark your calendar. And if something affects your neighborhood, your family, or your future, take a seat, raise your hand, and make your voice part of the record. Lorain City Council, first and third Monday, your city, your meetings. Those council meetings start at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and they're held inside of City Hall. Make sure. All right, guys, that brings us back to our second segment here. We're going to get back on and a little bit more on the timeline of what the city's now facing. Regardless of what they want to think, there's a point in the investigation where the conversation has to kind of shift away from isolated incidences and towards that structure of the record itself. That's exactly where these things stand tonight. It's no longer about one meeting, one charge, one directive. It's about how those events align, how the timing fits, what the alignment means legally. Because once the record starts to line up, the question is no longer what happened in a single moment. The question becomes more whether the outcome was shaped before the moment ever occurred. Was it predetermined? Was Garon's situation predetermined? Was mine? Now, whether people want to worry about recorded phone calls or any of that information, maybe what they should worry more about is what they said, what they were doing, what they've been emailing, what they've been hiding, and whom they may or may not have been threatening. Because I would see that way. Especially if they've witnessed something and they're honor bound by oath to report. I'd hate to put somebody in a bad spot, but that's all you folks have done to me in Lorain County government and Lorain City government. Don't put me in a bad spot. Why? They put me in a bad spot at every turn. And they've done that to others. This is why people come and watch. This is why people want to know this information, because they're tired of being crapped on by their government all across the board. And that's what people need to understand, because one of the most important concepts to understand right now is something I have been writing about directly in recent reporting. And that idea is that the record itself is the roadmap. The transcripts, the emails, the statements, the decisions, they are not separate pieces of information. They are the pathway. As I wrote, the purpose of preserving those transcripts is to make sure that what was said can be evaluated later against what was actually done. Before analysis begins, the record must be established. That's exactly what's happening here. The record has been built. Now the comparisons begin. When you look at the Petty situation, the issue is not simply where, that there was a meeting and a charge was followed, or a charge followed. The issue is whether, what exists alongside the timeline. There are statements captured at or near the same time indicating that discussions were occurring internally about how to deal with Mr. Petty. Now, that changes the legal analysis. I got to get some water instead of Red Bull. That changes the legal analysis completely, because when enforcement decisions follow or coincide with internal discussions about specific individuals, courts don't look at the conduct, they look at the intent. They look at whether the decision was made because of the conduct or whether the conduct was used to justify a decision that was already forming. Timing is not a side issue. Timing is often the strongest indicator of motive. There's a video circulating right now from a court in Iowa where the mayor had a kid arrested for basically saying he and the chief were fascist. And the Institute of Justice picked up the case, and I don't know exactly what he won, but he won, and that's the problem. That's what they're doing here. They didn't like my speech. Just because I'm trying to talk to Ray doesn't mean that he has the right to touch me, chest bump me, or do any of that stuff. And it definitely doesn't mean they have the right to ban me from City Hall because of his poor choices. Imagine a world where he doesn't yell at somebody in the audience for mumbling something to their person next to him without disturbing the meeting, so much so that the president had already moved on and moved past him, and he was the only one that seemed bothered by it. Imagine a world where that same individual, after being told not to do it, after being told through ADA regulations not to charge up on someone, did just that, hoping to trigger them. And then you look at the timing of all of it, and you look at the emails where he wrote similar things about me, where he said, we're looking on legal options to deal with Mr. Knapp, or AKA George Patton. I salute and miss you, Mr. George. Now, place that next to what happened in my case and Garon's case, and the city issued a directive banning me now from municipal property. Not a temporary removal, not a limited restriction, but a broad directive affecting access to all government spaces. Now, that's not a routine administrative action. That's a significant restriction. It implies that directly impacts my free speech, my access, the ability to engage in public processes. I won't get to go to the meeting where they talk about, again, the gun law that they act like is a big deal. Oh, he wants to pat bulls on the back. Oh, and he did this and that. No, you haven't done anything, bro. Like, it's going to come back. That was an inappropriate argument. The argument against standing was ridiculous. You didn't realize that all three people had sworn affidavits. You used the case law wrong. And I'm fairly certain it just got rubber stamped on through. But we'll be back in that court. Sure, we should have gone to the federal court, but we were giving you an opportunity. I mean, literally, we spiked the ball in the 1 yard line, gave Brinke a chance to run it in, and instead she fumbled it and they ran it back for a touchdown. Come on. Or she fumbled the end zone, they got a safety. Now we got to come back and beat it. And we will. I fully expect it. Listen, we're never going to get justice in Lorain County. Ever. It's been proven. I mean, look, you got judges fighting with the county commissioners. I didn't tell Garon that this is the way it was all going to happen. All these rats were going to start eating each other and then jumping shit. But, when you look at how it affects my ability to engage in public process and you examine the action, same questions arise. What was the basis? What was the authority that was relied upon? What process exists to challenge it? Those answers are not clearly provided. Really, there's nothing because Tim Williams wrote the letter and he's about as articulate as a rock. But when a restriction of that magnitude, all municipal property, is imposed without clearly defined authority, duration, and process, it raises serious constitutional questions and concerns. I honestly don't think he had the authorization to send it. I think he sent it. I think Ray was going on vacation. I think Williams sent it and didn't probably have authorization yet, and then CC'd everybody at the bottom, because then Bradley was forced to back it up and then say, well, if a neutral court says, well, I mean, again, he knows as well as everyone else did. If he was going to write something like that, he had to be very narrow, and they had to give me a very specific, issue. If they thought I did something, they should have arrested me that night. You can't just go around doing that kind of stuff, especially when you refuse to take a report when it's actually still fresh. Making me report it a couple weeks later is ridiculous. The connection between these two situations is where the legal exposure begins to grow, though, because now you're not just looking at a single enforcement action. You're looking at multiple actions affecting different individuals, involving overlapping actors, occurring within a closed time frame. That's when the courts begin to ask whether these are independent decisions or whether it's a pattern of a response to the individuals. I'm going to stop. And that's the exact point where the claims of retaliation and selective enforcement begin to take shape. What makes this even more serious is the presence of statements that reflect internal awareness and communication. Statements relaying what was said by the law department. Statements expressing concern about what someone is allowed to say or do. Statements indicating that decisions are being discussed behind the scenes and behind closed doors. These are not conclusions. These are pieces of context. And when those pieces of context align with the actions that were taken, they become evidence that the courts will consider we're evaluating intent. The law doesn't require a written directive that says someone is being targeted. It looks at whether the facts taken together support that inference. There's also a second layer here that can't be ignored, and that's the issue of pressure and intimidation. When a person believes that speaking could expose them to consequences, and when they express concern about protecting themselves, or where they are told information in a way that suggests imminent harm or risk to them or their career or their position or their protection, that becomes relevant. The law doesn't require an explicit threat. It looks at whether a reasonable person would feel deterred from speaking. When I heard, they felt deterred. When that type of concern exists alongside government action that affects individuals connected to those discussions, it becomes part of the broader analysis. So the reason the public records requests matter now is because they're not just filling in, they're not about just filling in the minor details. They go directly to the core questions. What communications occurred on the day of the Petty incident? What emails were exchanged between council members then and the law department and law enforcement? And what directives were given regarding enforcement? Whether there were or were not discussions about how to proceed before decisions were made. I know there were with me. I have the emails. I have Ray's own email saying how to deal with me, and then we see it. When he couldn't figure out a legal way, he tried to bully me out. Those records will, on Garon's case, will either confirm decisions made independently based on conduct, or whether they will show if there was coordination and conspiracy and pre-planning. Either outcome matters because outcome answers the question, right? I made sure to specify, old versus new, because I was talking at the school board meeting the other night, and outside, and Mr. Ballard was present, and I was talking about emails that I had discovered that talked about Mariah's hire, and there was some questionable emails where they were saying, let's not discuss this anymore in email. Please don't write this in email if you get what I mean. Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. Wink, wink, nod, nod kind of stuff. And he's like, well, I know you're not talking about me. No, sir, I wasn't talking about you, because you're right. You weren't a board member then, because they had to get your sister hired on before you became a board member, because then it would have been 2 board members and you wouldn't have had enough to vote. I digress. That's where this moves from narrative into legal reality. The issue is no longer about whether someone believes what happened. The issue is whether the record supports a claim that the government action was motivated by protected activity. And that's the core of this whole retaliation claim, everything that we've done and tried to do against the Lorain city. If actions are taken against individuals because they are speaking, reporting, or requesting records, that's not a policy issue. That's a constitutional issue. And when multiple individuals are affected in similar ways, involving similar actors within similar time frames, courts begin to look at whether there was a coordinated response rather than independent enforcement. When they saw, hey, look what we did with Garon, do it with Aaron. He'll just plead out to something, and we can go, yay! Look, we get to parade something like we do. Your letter. I noticed the Chronicle posted it about the gun lawsuit, and then Riley sends this big letter about how much hard work Bowles put into the case and all this stuff on the gun law. Dude, it's already appealed. I never expected it to go past Bremke. I honestly never expect anything to get past the Lorain County judge at this point. Because it seems like for, the favored, no justice is ever given to the disfavored. But if you're favored, you're golden in Lorain County is what I've learned. What everyone keeps saying, well, it's not, you're not going to get a job unless you know someone or your last name is somebody. Well, I mean, again, you guys keep telling me the exact same thing that everyone else is telling me, and that just tells a social worker how needed they are. Because that's where the broader county issues come into play, because the same theme appears there as well. We get outside the city, decisions are presented as routine, normalized, and procedural, even when the underlying reality is so much more significant. Recent reporting, has made clear, both by me and others, major financial decisions are often introduced in a way that kind of avoids urgency, even when the impact is very substantial, framing cuts and constraints as normal governance rather than as structural consequences. That approach to decision-making, presenting significant outcomes as routine. We're just going to cut 100 teachers. We're just going to do this, do that. It's part of what makes accountability difficult around here, because it masks the true impact until decisions are already in place. And that's why the record matters so much, because the record cuts right through the presentation. I went through tonight and I went back a year and I just took took every transcript from every single one of the podcasts that the Lorain County commissioners have done, and I put them online. Or I took the transcripts out, right? You can get the AI transcripts off YouTube after about a day or so. So I moved all those over, and I got all of them. And yeah, people, what they talk about, it's like, you just use AI. I use AI like a tool on occasion, and I'm not stupid. So I took the obviously the AI transcription from YouTube to get what I needed for the stories that I was writing. So now I had all these quotes from the AI on YouTube that I was able to take all the transcriptions from there and then go through and read all the transcriptions of the meeting, besides just listening to the meetings and going back through them, because then I felt embarrassed. I looked at how many people had watched these meetings. In some cases, it's 68 people. And then the room's empty. So honestly, I mean, let's have a truth moment here, folks. I know we're all mad at the commissioners. I know we're all mad at everybody, right? But who sat back and let this shit happen? We did. I'm embarrassed. I mean, I focused on the city for so long that I forgot about the county, the greater symptom. And as some of my mentors would say, you often forget about the state, which is why, I attacked Neo and that connection with Avril today in the county commissioners meeting. Why I'm trying to be broad in my presentation, why I'm trying to be present at school board meetings and at, town halls, and at, prior to last week, every city council meeting, so I could record them. So, well, prior to this coming week, I guess, even though I may still show up. That's why the record matters so much, folks, because the record cuts through all this BS. And I went back and looked at all of these transcripts and all the things the commissioners were doing, and I was like, oh my goodness, like, I see why some of my sources have sent me stuff, but I see why a lot of this stuff's happening now. I see why the money's gone. I haven't quite figured out the whole shell game yet, but I see a lot of it. And had we just been watching, had we the people just gone to a meeting or two, given them some accountability, been present, mirrored their, hey, look, we're here, we're watching. But no, there are some of the records where they come on and go, look, no one's here, no one's here, no one's here. And you heard it at the school board meeting the other night, like, we just want you to be here. In some cases, they're mad because they're getting nothing but negatives, but hey, at least we're here. But imagine if we just showed up before it got negative. Just saying. Not trying to be a jerk, just saying. But that's why it matters. That's because the record will cut through all that. And it's going to show exactly what was said, exactly what happened next. I mean, because you saw in that one, Swinsky was hot, man. She was ready to go. And I know, listen, everybody will point out to me, they're like, oh, you said this about Swinsky, you wrote this article about so-and-so. Not personal, folks. Any more than it was personal when, maybe it was a little personal when they wrote that stuff about me getting beat up at the madhouse that everybody loves to throw out there. It's like, so what? Wasn't the first time I've been beat up in my life. Like, I'm a soldier, but I'm an older soldier who also knows my limits when it comes to being able to fight. And I'm not going to let someone else define how I act, what I do, or how I engage with people. So yeah, I'm not going to fight. But arguably, they shared all my stuff, and they have, and people were like, oh, that was personal page versus work page. Well, nobody cared that when I was at Crossroads, and it was my personal page, and I was saying things about the Chiefs. So you guys take funny stances on things that it feels like you only take the stance when it suits you. So whatever argument suits you in the moment is what you want to use. And then if someone else used that argument, you're like, not cute. All right, I get it. But all those statements are allowed to be placed next to the actions that followed, right? When that comparison's made, patterns will either hold up or they don't. And that's the entire purpose of building a record first and analyzing it second. That's the way we talk about in social work. We talked about first you develop your basis. You have to get all your knowledge. You got to get peer review documentation. You have to get articles. You have to make sure you're right. Build your record. And then analyze it. It's almost like using scientific method, folks, because it removes speculation and replaces it with evidence. That's where things stand right now at the center or the end of the process, right? Is at the point where the record has been established, and the next step is we're going to test it. There are active cases in the court right now against the city of Lorain. Technically, one of mine has got one against the county and Tim Weitzel, and there are documents that have been produced and others that haven't. There are statements that exist and timelines that are now clear. And the next phase for us is not about argument. It's about completion. Because once the record's complete, the questions of intent will become answerable. It's not about making accusations tonight. It's about understanding the position the city's in. When you have overlapping actors, close timing, documented actions, and statements that suggest awareness and coordination, the legal risk is increasing. Not because of any single piece of evidence, but because how they all fit together. Courts are going to look at your events in isolation. They're going to look at them as patterns. They're going to look at them as timing. They're going to look at them as consistency, and they're going to look at whether the actions were taken to align with lawful enforcement or not. What do they suggest? What do you guys think they're going to suggest? At the end of the day, there's only two outcomes when the record is complete. Either the actions that they took against me and Garon will be shown to be consistent, lawful, and based on conduct, or they won't. That determination is not made by narrative, not made by evidence. Right now, the process of gathering that evidence is still underway. I'm still trying to get, as well as my attorney, trying to get a lot of emails that they just don't want to give up. And I get why. They redact them, they hide them. I mean, they don't look good for them. Ray just straight out said he was coming after me. And that's where we stand right now. Not at an end, but at a point where the record's able to speak for itself. We're going to move into the county next. I'm going to give you a little final thought on this one before we move to the county and their issues with, how their issue patterns seem to match Lorain's. But what we're going to talk about right now is I don't care anymore who I have on recording, who I don't have on recording. certain people are out there worried we have them on recording, and I have Damaki on recording in that house. I also have Damaki yelling at Phallus back in, 8 years ago when he was on council. I mean, again, you guys don't see the patterns, but okay, whatever. You got the same people trashing you all the time, and yet you want to defend them. I have plenty of recordings of people. Just like Lorain Ritchie runs around and emails all the government people, I email them too. But I don't email them about her. But I also want to point out, for the record, never, ever, ever did I say that any information that I received from any sources came from an executive session. And for you to think that, Ms. Ritchie, is honestly kind of cracks me up, because why do you think that they wouldn't be ballsy enough to talk about it everywhere? They do. They'll talk about it to your face. I have emails that they sent that they didn't redact that clearly say that they'll do it. So to suggest that information we received from the inside source happened to be through a executive sessions BS, because if what I said out loud was they're in there right now talking about how to get rid of you, that would insinuate that she's real time telling him what's going on. So there wouldn't have been an executive session for her to report on, because she'd have kind of needed to be in it, because that would insinuate the meeting wasn't over. And this was after everything was done. So I think you're wrong. And I think you need to stop reading into my podcasts and trying to find ways out of this. I know you're scared. Again, I put it out there to my attorney, Ms. Ritchie, you want out of this, shut down your political page, apologize publicly, and retire. Regardless of what you want to believe, your continued discussions about me or what I may or may not be doing is slanderous, because you're making direct accusations that I'm doing things that I'm not doing. I'm only saying you're receiving my emails for no good reason, and that certain bad actors within the city are sending them to them without a proper records request. And that led to other issues. But now that I've read your emails, I see why. But that's going to bring us to part 3, from City Hall to the county building. And that's where we're going to see how this pattern does not stop, because you look at the county and it's way worse. And again, I said I feel bad, because I feel like I've been neglecting the county by watching the city of Lorain so much. And I'll do better, but I'm just one guy, and I do tend to get, kind of deer in the headlights, I guess. So what we're going to do real quick is take another quick break, and then I'm going to start with part 3. And again, this will be on recording, so anybody who's not here listening to it live, understand if it's not 1:44 a.m., this is not live. You're watching a recording of it, because I did it late. But here's that next ad section. I'm going to go grab a water, and then we'll get right back to section 3, where we start talking about the county and how the county's government's been doing pretty much the same thing, if not worse, to, besides just New Russia Township and all these other outlying areas, how they're just really running ramshot over people, and how we as the population have failed to be good stewards of our government, because we haven't been going to these meetings. And they've been able to do what they want now that we're showing up, but sometimes it's a day late and a dollar short. This is why it's important for all of us to go to these meetings. You know what I mean? Like, just remember. And again, I feel like one of these is like, our Tuesday one was at 9:30. I feel like the Friday one is at later. Could be wrong. You might just look up the times, but for sure, check them out. Go add their YouTube page. Again, it's scrolling across this during the entire, see, every Tuesday at 3:30 and Friday at 9:30. I must the 3:30. So go add their page. Go add their YouTube page. Add it. Click their link. Add it so you get their stuff. I get their stuff not only on YouTube, but I get it on Facebook. So at it, if you can't make it, I get it. People can't make it to these meetings because they schedule them odd hours. It was difficult. I didn't want to go at 9:30 in the morning. And when you look at the way I spoke, it shows. I was pissy. I don't want to be there that early and dealing with these yahoos. And I don't want to sit there and listen to them up there giggling like Beavis and Butthead. I swear to God, if you watch the version of old Beavis and Butthead, like Gallagher can be Beavis and Moore can be Butthead. And they're like, yeah. Shut up, Beavis. No, wait, bunghole, check it out. Like, we're gonna smack these guys. Yeah, look at them. They're cute, but they don't even know they've already lost. Ah! You know what I mean? Like, it's just crazy that these guys are out there doing it. And it just annoys me because they're just laughing away our future. We wouldn't be smart businessmen if we wrote checks. Dude, you've been writing checks that we don't have money for. You bought a mall, bro. You bought a mall. It's not 1987, all right? Like, the stores that used to fill those don't exactly have the best outlook right now anyway. So, Victoria's Secret's not looking at so much of a secret anymore. So, what are you going to do at the mall? So, we're going to play a quick ad, and I'll be right back. Here at Unplugged with Aaron Knapp, we like to thank our sponsors. We have a few unofficial sponsors tonight, and they are definitely not paid sponsorships. I want to throw out there a big thank you to Joseph Jones and Eric Jones of the Lorain Daily and the Vermilion Daily. They have a local news page. You should check them out. They do plenty of great work, broadcasting all the news that is the news that you want to have in Lorain and Lorain County. So check them out. Also, please, if you need any legal services, feel free to reach out to Robert Gargas. You can find him listed online. He's a fine attorney and comes highly recommended by yours truly. And last but not least, I want to mention DNC Radio. Please make sure you check out one of the up-and-coming internet hip-hop stations and all of their shows. They put on a lot of shows. You have the Never Outdone show. You also have the Eric Bowen show, Speak Up, Speak Out. So please make sure you guys check them out as well if you're looking for your latest and up-to-date hip-hop artistry. Thank you for tuning in. This has been a non-paid sponsorship brought to you Unplugged with Aaron. Here. Boy, I can tell my allergies are kicking back up. They said one way is to not open windows like at this time and let pollen get it all off your clothes. Boy, whew. I have my windows open today. But while we're talking about Eric Bowens and the Eric Bowens show, remind you guys, he also runs the Illyria Youth Sports Group, does bowling. There's a lot of real helpful stuff around the community. Eric is spelled ARIC and then BOWENS. Just check him out, add him on Facebook. I see his posts all the time. I reshare him. You'll see him on my Facebook. But that's going to bring us back to our podcast, and we're going to be talking about the county government now, not the city, because much to the county and the school districts, sure, and I've had plenty of extra time to focus on them lately. And you guys can thank the city of Lorain for that week. But there's a tendency in local government to treat each issue as if it exists like in isolation, but like a city issue is a city issue, and a county issue is a county issue. And different offices, different officials, different responsibilities. I even talked about it today in the meeting. They're like, oh, we have to pay the municipal bailiffs. Okay, so again, when you guys realize that, like, just look at that tie-in. And you look at it and you go, hey, sorry, I got a text from somebody. But you look at that time and you go, look, hey, some of these people are all doing the same things. The municipal court, if the court has a responsibility, the county has a responsibility to cover part of the muni payments, court's payments, well, then that whole ticket thing also falls on the court. But they act like they're all separate. That's how it's presented to the public, right? When you step back and you look at how decisions are actually made, especially when you follow the record, you begin to see something different. You begin to see that real issue is not the building, it's the structure, it's how decisions are framed, how information is presented, and how the public is expected to interpret what's happening. Now, what I've been documenting on the county side is not just a financial issue, it's a pattern of communication and framing that should sound pretty familiar at this point. Decisions that carry significant impact are presented in a way that minimizes urgency. Major changes are described as routine. The full implications are not always front and center, right? At the time the decision is being made. And by the time the public fully understands what's happened, that decision's already been set in motion. There's not speculation. That is what the record shows when you go back and read it line by line. And I did. In my reporting, I've made this point directly. The record itself is not just a collection of documents. It is the roadmap. It shows you exactly not just what was decided, how it was introduced, how it was explained, what was emphasized versus what was not. Because a decision is presented as routine, it changes how it's received. It lowers the scrutiny. It creates the appearance of normal process, even when the outcome is anything but routine. That is not just communication strategy. That is a governance issue. And when you look at the county like financial picture and discussions, what stands out is what stands out is how those numbers are framed. Cuts are described as necessary adjustments. Constraints are described as manageable. Structure issues are described as part of the normal course of operations. But when you're actually following the record, when you look at the totals, when you look at the trajectory over time, right, the picture that emerges is not one of routine adjustment. It's one of cumulative impact. It's, one of the decisions that taken together began to affect services, staffing, and long-term stability, as we start to see in what we're seeing in JFS and, what we're about to probably see at the schools. That's the one thing I keep trying to say, we can't just pretend these things are separate, because they're not. The issue is not whether any single decision can ever be justified. The issue is how decisions are made, how they are presented. At the city level, the question is whether enforcement actions are being taken based on conduct or based on individuals. But at the county level, the question has changed. What we have is whether financial decisions are being presented in a way that fully reflects their impact. And in both cases, the underlying issue is the same: transparency, right? We hear that word thrown around a lot. We've been hearing a lot at schools too. Accountability, transparency. It's not just about whether, familiar documents exist or not, right? And it's not about whether the glass has been cleaned, although that's important too. It's about whether the public is given a clear understanding of what the documents actually mean. They were throwing slides up at the school board that people didn't even understand. Hell, the teachers didn't even understand some of it, and it was their unions. Well, it wasn't their unions, but it was other unions. Now, that's what, and it's about what, we look at those decisions, how they're made, and it is about whether the record, when viewed as a whole, tells a consistent story, or whether it just reveals gaps between what was said and what was done. And that's usually what I'm seeing here. They say one thing and do another, look at this end, look at this end. Well, they're like, whoop, gotcha. But that's what makes it more important. Both the city and the county operate within that same ecosystem. The same taxpayers, the same communities, the same overlapping interests. Lorain City is 60,000 strong of Lorain County. And when the patterns of communication, decision-making, and transparency begin to look similar across different levels of government, it starts to raise a bigger question. Is this a series of isolated issues, or is it a systematic approach to governance? Because the full impact of decisions is not always placed in front of the center for the public to evaluate, right? And this isn't about accusing anyone of wrongdoing, although I'd argue if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, probably a duck. But what the fuck, Chuck? The record does not just capture outcomes. It captures that process. It captures how decisions are introduced and how they're justified and how they're explained. And when you compare that process across different situations, patterns begin to emerge. Part of what scares them about someone like me is that I thrive in this. My brain is structured differently than a lot of people's when it comes to these things. I can't sit and watch an entire TV show without getting up and doing something else. I envy people that can actually veg out and watch something. Every once in a while I find a TV show that just really incites me and I can do it. But for the most part, I can't. I can do it with this. I can sit and read hours of transcripts and be fine with it. I can go to AI on YouTube or whatever YouTube transcripts are, get all the transcripts, put them down into a Word document, and then read the document. Now I'm old school, sit and read on my computer, or I'll print it out. I don't care. And then once I read it, I keep it. Like, my brain just works differently. I just have this weird retention level when I read things, but I don't. TV just takes up space I can't use. I'd rather read books. I'd rather read these. There's not books. And again, this just saves me money. I can request and read all these documents, and I learn so much about the government and about government spending and about how my government works, and I get educated. They always think, a record's decision against me is a loss. No, it's an education. And there's nothing wrong with being educated as a voter and as a citizen, and about being a good steward, but also understanding when to hold the government accountable. When they've educated me, it showed me, oh, well, that's not something I should hold them accountable for. And I get it. It's upsetting for them sometimes and upsetting for me sometimes, but that's the process that's set up for us to do this. So when people act like I'm doing something wrong, oh, you're harassing a government, please. Asking questions is not harassing. And just because you don't like the volume of my questions or because I'm being silly or whatever doesn't give you a right to touch me or hit me with doors. But, whether the public is given a clear and complete understanding of why the decisions are being made or not, really, and what they mean moving forward, at the city level, the issue is not going to be whether someone can be removed from a meeting or restricted from property, right? It's whether those actions are being applied consistently and based on conduct rather than individuals. Did you do what you did because it was Aaron, or did you do what you did because you had grounds? Same thing with Garon. Now, in both cases, the answer lies in the same place, the record. Not in the summaries, not in the statements, not in the explanations after the fact. Now, I've got 3 video camera views of it. I got body cam 1, body cam 2, chest cam. The other one's not quite visible as much, and we'll just hang out of that one for a while. But the actual record of what was said, when it was said, and what happens next, because when you line all those things up, you're either going to get consistency or you're going to get contradiction. And that's where accountability begins. The reason this matters is simple. Government does not operate on trust alone. It operates on documentation. And social work, again, did you document it? I know that's backwards, but document. Did you document it? Because if you didn't document it, it doesn't exist. Document. I cannot diagnose crazy. It doesn't exist, but I can document the hell out of it. Right? I can write it down. And that's, say what you want, but OSU gave me a love for that. I understand that. I watch it. I feel it. Now, others may not like that. You're nerdy, you're boring, you're dumb, you got, no life, whatever. Okay, fine. Maybe I don't have a life, but you can thank the city for that too. Because I am a licensed social worker. There are much better things I could be doing. I could still be at Crossroads. But you know, the bottom line is that I could be there. Hold on one second. Yes. I'm doing a podcast. There's no such thing as more hours in a day. Wow. You want to listen to me do a podcast while you drive home? Here, I'll continue doing the podcast while you drive home, and then that way you can have someone to listen to. Yeah, because we were talking about other things about the. Well, I'll call you back as soon as I get out of the podcast. I'm almost done with it. All right, bye. Sorry about that, but she's important. The reason this matters is simple because government does not operate on trust alone. It operates on documentation. It operates on transparency. It operates on the ability of the public to see not just what decisions are made, but how they're made, right? That's why we have all those documentaries on TV, how it's made. I love those. I can sit through how it's made, for the record. TV documentaries, I can all day long. I can watch animal documentaries or how it's made. Now, when the process becomes unclear, that's when the framing does not match the impact or when the actions follow patterns that aren't fully explained. It's not the job of the public to assume everything is fine. It's the job of the public, us, to ask those questions. That's what this is about. It's about asking whether or not the decisions and the way the decisions are being made and presented is consistent with the level of transparency that the public deserves and the law requires. It is about recognizing that patterns matter, whether these patterns involve enforcement at city level, financial decisions at the county level. It's about understanding that in both cases, the transfer will not come from statements. It will come from the record. Because at the end of the day, whether you're talking about enforcement, access, funding, the same principles are going to apply. The record is the roadmap. And when you follow the roadmap all the way through, it will show you exactly where you are. I mean, that's what Judge Schwensky was saying today, too. You know, we came in here. We talked to you. You agreed. And then, bullshit. All right. Same thing with Sheriff Hall. We talked to you. We agreed. Bullshit. I mean, again, I may have my beef with the domestic court. I may have my beef with Sheriff Hall. It's my beef. It's not. It doesn't affect the county. I don't know that, other people would have done a better job or worse job. I'm just saying, like, these are the facts. All of these different county agencies are at beef and at war with the commissioners. You got the auditor's office. I mean, literally, I've been down there now on 2 separate Fridays for 2 separate commissioner meetings. And both days there's been people trying to get to the auditor's office going, oh, that's right. They're closed on Fridays. But there's a moment in any investigation where you stop talking about general patterns and start walking, through those numbers. And that's what we're going to do next. Do another quick pause because we're at part 4 and we're getting close to the end here. And I want to finish up. So we're going to do another quick break. A word from our sponsors, and I'll be right back. Hey there, folks. If you really want to know what's happening in your hometown, the place to go is Lorain Daily and Vermilion Daily. From city council and school boards to local businesses, community events, and neighborhood stories, these outlets cover what the big media ignores. This is hyper-local news for real people in real communities. Visit Lorain Daily and VermilionDaily.com today. Read it, share it, support local journalism because your community deserves coverage that actually lives here. That, my friend, was Opus #1. That's the hold music from the VA. It's one of the most calming things that I listen to anymore. I spent so many years listening to that, calling the VA, that, I mean, oddly, it soothes my soul a little bit, hearing that. And so now we're getting into part 4 of the county, the numbers, right? The sales tax, the sheriff's like thing, and the failure. There's a moment when you have to stop talking about the general patterns and start walking through those numbers, right? Hate math. But the actual admissions, the actual decisions that are being made, right? Because Judge Swinsky today was saying, hey, we told you and you didn't listen. You know, her lawyer, Emily, gets up there and says the same thing. I get it. I've had my issues with the juvenile court and the administrator there as well, because they failed to do what they should have done to back me up. You know, again, one might say karma. But I also see the frustration they have with the county commissioners that all these other agencies are having. And I can look at my situation and go, boo-hoo, Aaron. Or I can look at it from the county situation and go, what the hell, bro? Like, you literally got the judges to have to get lawyers because you hired Witskin, Hertzika, and Penza. I always want to call them Bosnia Herzegovina, but they're the same lawyers that the city. I mean, these guys are getting millions, and I mean millions of dollars because these government agencies are fighting. Now, I've documented this before. The only people that lose in these fights is the taxpayer. And they pointed it out today in the county commissioner meeting, right? One of the most important things that has already been established though, through the record is that payroll has increased significantly over time. That's not an opinion. That's documented. Total payroll moved roughly $214 million to over $239 million, I think it was, with projections pushing even higher. And at the same time, the number of employees earning over $100,000 has more than doubled. Those aren't small changes, folks. Those are structural shifts in how resources are being allocated. Now, when payroll grows at that scale, it becomes the central pressure point in any budget discussion. What makes it even more important is that these increases didn't happen overnight. They happened over multiple years through multiple decisions. Each one may have been presented to you and been reasonable at the time, right? But when you step back and you look at the cumulative effect of it all, you just think to yourself, well, the picture changes, but it's no longer about the individual hires and the individual salaries. It becomes more about the sustainability, I guess, of it all, and of the entire system. Because once payroll reaches a certain threshold, every other decision begins to revolve around how to maintain it. And that's where the sales tax issue came up. And it keeps coming up in every meeting, it feels like. So I understood why it failed. I tried to explain to Sheriff Hall at the time. I advocated strongly against it because there's a section in there that clearly allows them to take the money and use it for other things. And I know they said they wouldn't. I mean, I know they promised they wouldn't. I know they said they would never do that, right? They also promised that, the Midway Mall deal was going to go through and it was going to be great. And they promised no one's going to back out, even though my sources were saying it was. I mean, here's the thing. At this point, we're going to get into a little mutual admiration club because, my source may be loving the Aaron Knapp, Brian Baker show at the county commissioners. I'm going to say the man's never been wrong. I mean, I almost would say, like, if he called me up and was like, listen, man, your mom's a spy for the Soviets and has been since you were a child, I'd be like, damn, man. Starova, bratan. Hello, mother. I understand now. I need to conceal that we must go back to the motherland. I mean, honestly, I'm not believing if he told me that. I would hope he wouldn't tell me that. But this guy's been right on about everything. So this is where the sales tax issue comes into focus, right? Because I'm aware of a lot more than people want to give me credit for. I have a lot more information than they want to give me credit for. And yeah, I know exactly what's going on. In most cases, most of the news agencies do, just for the record. I don't have some secretive source that only gives it to me. I mean, that sounded wrong. I would love it. I would love it if he was only giving it to me, or she, or they, or them, or it, or whatever pronoun they use. At this point, I don't care. I'll call you whatever you want. Jiminy Cricket, Zippity Doodah. All I know is I take what they say seriously. Yeah, I back it up. I do factual research. I do requests. I've been accused of being the source. But it's caused me to look at all this stuff. And so, but I just want to say to them, thank you for always providing the information. And I want to say to the other media out there, thank you for always ignoring my source, because I don't. Like I said, I would have to believe him if he called me and said that my own mother, was a member of the Soviet spy union, even since the CCP is long since disbanded. We might have to go back that we were sleeper agents in the 80s. I loved the 80s. They were a good time to be alive. I love it. But that's not the case. So we're going to talk about the sales tax. I digress. I just like to be a little funny every once in a while. I kind of break up the monotony of these boring talks. But this was sales tax. That's what I find hilarious and humorous. And so, yeah, I'm boring. Sales tax isn't just another revenue source, right? It's the primary mechanism through which the county is funding all of its operations. Because when a sales tax revenue is strong, the system can absorb increases, right? When it flattens or declines, every decision that's being made through periods of growth comes back into focus. That's exactly what we see right now, right? The record shows that there are concerns about revenue not keeping pace with expenditures. And that's not speculation. That's coming directly from the county's own discussions. When officials begin to acknowledge the cuts may be necessary, that's an admission that the current trajectory is not sustainable under existing revenue conditions. And when those admissions are made, they have to be viewed in the context of the decisions that are led to that point, right? Because here's the critical issue. Payroll is expanded if the number of high salary positions are increased, and if revenue no longer keeps pace, then something's got to give. That's basic math. Even I know that as a social worker. May have to go back to LCC to learn it, but when they sent me back to OSU, I was smart in the math. I can't even believe I said it like that. I did have to spend a little extra time on the mathematical portion of my education, but now I can calculate the square footage of my garden. The question here is where those adjustments end up falling. And that's where that transparency becomes essential, both here, the school district, anywhere they're cutting. Public needs to understand where those adjustments will affect services, staffing, or both. Because it's amazing to me on all levels that people are talking about they work 40 hours a week, even if it's a part-time job. Okay, bro, you make $100 and something thousand a year. Honestly, part-time job for $100,000, $20,000 a year is not part-time. I'll do that shit for full-time, folks. I mean, honestly, I joke, but I ran for office and didn't get much pull, and I get why. People didn't know who I was. They didn't know what I stood for. They didn't know that no matter what, I do what's right, not what's efficient. I don't back, yeah, sure. I got played a lot. In certain circumstances, did I really get played, or did I make deals with the devil and not realize it? Or maybe I did subconsciously realize it. I don't know. But where I stand now is I see a clear picture of the land. I see a Republican Party that didn't want to back me and still doesn't. I see a Democratic Party that fears me. Honestly, I'm not sure how long it takes for the rules to reset. Hopefully they reset and I'm just whatever, but so if everybody just wrote me in, I'm not saying I wouldn't do it. But you look at these county commissioners and the way they're doing things, sales tax, all this. Sales tax not evenly distributed in its impact. It affects every resident, right, regardless of income. But when a county relies heavily on that tax to support a very large and growing payroll structure. I mean, again, you're going to tell me, commissioners, you don't have day jobs? Okay, fine. You make 110, I think, each, 112, 118, something like that, maybe 120,000. All right. If it's only part-time, it's only 20 hours a week, not 40. Cut that number in half and give that to JFS. You guys got money, right? Take 60. Hell, I'll do it for 60. You guys elect me county commissioner. I'll take 60 grand a year pay cut. If it's 120, I'll be at 60. That's how you show good stewardship of your government. You say, look, I get it. I'm asking you guys to tighten the belt. I mean, arguably, a lot of people would say half's a lot, but if you got a day job, and honestly, who couldn't live off 60 grand a year? That's what I'm trying to figure out, why you guys all need these triple-digit salaries. When the people below you expect to live off pennies. I mean, it's sad when JFS is actually, using the very services that it has to met out. So, you guys figure that out. What the record starts to show, though, is that these financial realities are often introduced gradually. There's not a single moment where everything was laid out in full, although I went back through and looked. Instead, what you see are little discussions about constraints, discussions about future considerations, discussions about potential adjustments. Each one, small one taken alone, and they appear manageable. But when you start to connect the dots, you're going to follow them over time. They form a very clear trajectory, right? That trajectory is what matters, and that's what I've been following. I've been watching their old meetings. I've been following what they've said. I heard what the judge said. I've heard what Sheriff Hall said. I heard what other people said when they said, hey, this person, but you said this. I've heard what civilians have said. I've heard what Baker said, and Baker seems to be the only one that goes to the meetings always. And it's clear that what they say and what they do is different. So that's why I started to look, because I want to see what they're saying. I got all the transcripts of every meeting going back all the way to last year. Early 25, I went back. I'll go back further. They have, I think, up to 21 online, but I didn't really see the point in going back that far. But when a trajectory leads straight to the point where the cuts are being discussed, and the natural question is going to be whether the earlier discussions fully accounted for that, where that path was going to lead, right? Did y'all know that back then, or did you just make bad decisions? Because that issue is financial decisions intersect with outside contracts and consulting arrangements, right? The record clearly reflects that you guys have been making payments to outside entities, reoccurring consulting fees, now legal fees. You were paying your HR, your current HR's person, you're paying her LLC to do a job that you then ended up for probably less, and then you hired her, I think, for more. But she was part of the crew that helped you, facilitate all this, and then you hire your LLC girl. Okay, I got you. You bring her as HR. No revolving door. Just got it. Must be nice. Again, I want to know whose back I got to scratch to get one of these immaculate jobs, right? Mary Springowski seemed to be onto something when she kept saying, well, who's getting a job? Everyone said I was getting a job. What the fuck, man? Like, I want a job. I got a license. But again, it's not who you know until you blow, right? Or what your last name is. That's the only way you get it. Come to think of it, the love of my life, Jennifer, back in Avon Lake, who I moved here to Ohio initially to be with Miss Jennifer Robert. She told me once, I was talking about the school social worker in Avon Lake, and having lived here all her life, or not all her life, but a good chunk of her adult life while she was raising her child, she made an offhand comment to me where she said, dude, you're not going to get a school social worker job. Those are handed out by who you know. And I thought, what? Like, is that not the way it worked in California? Like, we had EEOC, and people were scared of that kind of stuff. Like, nepotism didn't fly. Like, you didn't want anybody with your same last name in the chain of command. You're like, Mr. Smith, I realize, but we've got a Mr. Smith here. Oh crap! All right, just shit me out. You know we're not related though, right? Nah, it doesn't matter. So y'all do things different out here in Ohio. I get it. She said, and she was right. Because the record reflects payments to outside. Well, she did say I never really complete, and I did complete OSUs and get in and go to and finish. But she was right on that. She was right on the way they do things out here in Ohio. Now the record reflects payments to outside entities. I've seen them. They see the consulting fees, and I saw the ones to Miss Arville's LLC, and then I see Miss Arville getting a job. Now I start to look because now I'm going where you guys are under pressure. Now I'm going to look at everything. It all becomes something, and not because every or any contract is necessarily improper, but because all expenditures together determine the available resources of the county. Transparency in those arrangements is essential for us to look and go, are you really stiffing these people at JFS? I mean, I know you are because I've read the contracts. I know what you're trying to do. It's god awful. I'm not gonna, spend an hour talking about it tonight, but I pointed out a lot of them. I even pointed out my thing today. You want them to go without getting back pay. You want to turn their sick days into, you want to turn their PTO days into sick days and give them a bonus to say, if you don't use them, you get a bonus of pay. Well, that's not a bonus. We'll give them to you back. So basically, if we give you 10 days, and those 10 days are worth, $1,200 or whatever. I'm just giving a number, and you don't use them, we'll give you a $1,200 bonus. Well, that's not. I'll gladly give you $1,200 here, or I'll give you $1,200 here. But if you want this $1,200, you must not use these days at all. Either way. Wait. So I can either get, no, that's not how it works, folks. But that's what they want them to do. And the only thing that their fact finder disagreed with a little bit, I think, was the longevity bonuses, which is what they were asking for. And again, I get it. But I mean, if you guys were paying them a living wage and you did something better with the insurance program, but God, if you just fixed the PTO, I mean, that was the big thing. They fixed it for management, but not for anyone else. And when I look at those county dollars and I see how many people at the top layer are making triple digits, and you're going to tell me, you guys that look at your fellow man, you let's just say this the way everyone around here seems to be all religious, right? So you go and you pick up your Bible, right? You find me, and let me get this one. Find me the section in your Bible that says "Get what you can get and screw your fellow man." Is that under what? Is that under MOORE 316, or would that be under RI Riddell 512? I'm just trying to figure out where in the Bible it says that. And where in the Bible it says that all you people making triple digits can't look around and see a county in distress. All you leaders, you say you're leaders? Are you leaders? Sound like you're cowards. Why don't you offer to take cuts? Instead, no. You got the schools handing out $91,000 jobs and nepotistic handouts. Again, doesn't even qualify for the position. At least Tony I don't know that Tony has his master's. I'm sure he does if he got his teaching license. I believe Aaron has her master's. So say what you want, they both had a master's degree. That's what it required. Not Miss Mo. She got a bachelor's in communication. Nothing wrong with that. Respectable. I got a bachelor's in social work and a minor in drug and alcohol counseling. I get it. But some jobs I just can't do because they want a master's degree. Not because it's, maybe because it's the industry standard or maybe because it's the law. But either way, when you're doing that, it's insane. So when you guys look at these people that are saying, oh, we just have to tighten our belt somewhere, again, you got $330,000 sitting at that table with the commissioners. You're going to guys say, imagine if each one of you gave up the top level of your money. You just said, I'm going to have $100,000. That would be what? $30,000, $40,000 back.
Now, I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but $30,000-$40,000 is probably a lot to those JFS workers. I know it's a lot to the school workers. I know for the upper management of the school to be sitting at that board and have over $1 million sitting in management and not want to cut back while you're telling, us that our kids have to lose paras. You need 2 superintendent assistants. Give me a break. I'll gladly take all those paras over one of those assistants, period. Same thing with JFS. Look, I don't care whether the city or the county or people think what they do is not important. I'm a social worker. I know what they do is important. And the amounts they're doing it for. And if you guys even took the time to read the contracts, you'd realize how important it is that you stand up for them. I drove by today and I had to honk my horn for them. And they're still trying to do the job. But put them back to work. Give them a livable contract. You say you have willingness to come to the table, but you don't seem to have any willingness to come to the table because the offer you offered at the end, your last final best offer, was the same as your first final best offer. I've seen it. I know. Again, I have people everywhere, not just at the county. So when you guys don't realize that, I'm just trying to tell you, when everyone goes online and they say, "Oh, we hate you, Aaron," that's just a small select portion of people that tell me I have nothing better to do than be online while they're online chastising me. But the good portion of people that are in my inbox that thank me, that continue to thank me, that tell me out in public, thank you for trying to represent us, for trying to give us a voice where people don't listen. People think. You think I learned about Miss Mo Ballard on my own? You think that was my choice? You think I just sit home and look for random people to go after? And I definitely don't want to go after people of color because I support people of color more than life itself. I'm glad that all of them hold strong positions within our government. I don't have an issue with her having the job. My issue is when we're asked to cut, and the cuts are coming, are you being responsible to bring this person with this training on at this time at this amount? Would it not have been more responsible to say, sure, we'll let you be our communications director, and sure, we'll move it back to the supervision under the superintendent, but we're gonna have to. You can't just. She bargained. She wanted more. She wanted 110, which seems oddly around the same number that the other two had. But she said, moving costs, all that, getting back from Texas, back home to daddy. Honestly, come on, guys. Let's just be realistic. You could have done it I would have done it for $60,000. I know any one of these teachers, and then you could have taken that extra $31,000 and applied that to your budget. Hell, I'll do it. I would have done it for $50,000, $55,000. And other people would do a lot of these other jobs for a lot less than the triple digits that you're making at all levels of county government. And that's why it's so hard for these government people to believe when these agencies that have these people working for $18 an hour, when you got upper management working for, $100,000 a year. Financial pressures, I get it. But when they're described in general terms without fully connecting them to the underlying causes, it starts to become difficult for the public to ever understand the full picture. When the increase in payroll are not directly tied to discussions about sustainability and services, the connection is not always clear. When we see the impact of a sales tax reliance and not fully explained, the burden of the public can be overlooked. So that sales tax was only supposed to be to help build the jail, right? But then why is it suddenly everyone's crying about it? If they weren't going to use the extra money for themselves because they had a clause, and that's why I said we weren't going to let it go through. They took that clause out. That's what I sold it on. If you just made a tax that was just for that agency and there were hardline clauses that says you have to keep your greedy clause off of it, people would have passed it. But they didn't want to do that at the commissioners. They wanted to leave a clause in that they can use it because that's how they help their buddies. Again, I've done all the research. I've done all the numbers on all of their money that they've been getting through their PACs and how they donate to themselves and how they get their friends' jobs. I see it all. That's why the record matters so much, because the record doesn't just show that final decision. It shows a path of the decision. It shows what was known, when it was known, how it was discussed. And when you compare that to the outcomes, you can start to evaluate whether decisions were made with full transparency, full awareness of their long-term impact, right? Well, there's a broader issue here, and that connects directly back to what we discussed earlier with the city, is that when government actions, like whether they involve enforcement, whether they involve financial decisions, whether they're presented in a way that minimizes their impact and separates them from the broader context, it becomes more difficult, right, for the public to engage meaningfully. Transparency is not just about releasing documents. It's about ensuring that those documents and the decisions they reflect can be understood in context, in real time, by the people that are supposed to be able to understand it. And are you breaking it down to a level that they can understand? Are you expecting them to understand things that apparently our commissioners don't even understand? Because I see them up there asking question after question. Like, they don't study before they even come to the meeting. If you're working 40 hours, why do you come to the meeting not knowing how to be in a meeting? I suggest you buy a copy of this. It's called Robert's Rules of Order, right? I put little tabs in if you want. No, I'm not done anymore. I like mine. I have a hand copy too. You guys should really read that, because you guys are always out of order, out of turn, out of breath. I mean, honestly, on the day that you were honoring Ultimate Tool, I just found it funny. I was like, listen, the Ultimate Tools are giving out, awards to the Ultimate Tool Company. I think that's what it was called, something Tools. But I was just like, Tools giving out awards to Tools. But at the county level that the numbers themselves are really the telling story. The rising payroll, increasing high salary positions. Why are we giving Dan Petticourt a job over at JFS for such a high amount of money when you can't even give like a portion of that to their employees? It's about, how reliance on these sales tax revenues and discussions about potential cuts are not isolated data points. They're all connected, folks. They form a narrative about how the county has been operating and where it's heading. The responsibility of public officials is to ensure that the narrative is clear, complete, and accurate. I don't get the feeling anybody feels that it's that way at the county commissioner meetings. The responsibility of the public and anyone engaged in accountability work, well, I should say you guys, the public, me, accountability work, what we have to do is follow that narrative wherever it leads, right? And if it leads that the county commissioners are doing their jobs, then, but it doesn't seem that way, because in the end, just like with the city, the answer is never found in any single one statement they make. It's found in the full record. So when you put the numbers, the discussions, and the decisions all together, you're going to get a complete picture every single time. And that complete picture is going to show either it'll support the decisions that were made, or it will raise questions that need to be answered. Now, that's kind of the point that we're at right now. The point where the numbers, the record, and the reality have to be aligned. And, I really feel like that's where that 0.25% becomes control. Because let's just point out something here. I went back and rewatched that whole sales tax debacle thing with Hall and everybody in there again, because I had watched it a couple times before. But not enough of you have watched those commissioners' meetings. But there are moments in public finance where the number itself is not the story. The story is what the number represents, and once it's put into motion. 0.25%, right? 0.25%. On its face, it sounds small. It's 0.25%, right? 0.25%. And it's presented that way, right? Minimal, manageable, insignificant, almost. I mean, come on. But as I reported, what the hearing record begins to show is that 0.25% is not just a number, it's a mechanism. It is a mechanism. It is a mechanism. It is the transfer of authority. It is a decision about who controls funding, who controls priorities, and ultimately who gets to control the outcomes. The central issue in that hearing, I laid it out on my story, is not simply whether that 0.25% of sales tax for the sheriff's thing existed, right? It was where that revenue was directed and who decided how it was used. When a dedicated portion of countywide taxes is directed to a single function, particularly public safety, it does mean more than fund operations, right? It does more than that. It creates a structural shift. It removes flexibility. It locks in priorities. Once that lock is in place, every future budget discussion has to operate within that constraint, right? But that's where the phrase becomes a little more important, because that 0.25% became the control. What it's describing is not a size of the tax. It's describing the effect of the earmarking. Because when revenue is earmarked, it's no longer subject to the same level of deliberation each budget cycle. It's already spoken for, right? That's already in the budget. That's the general fund. That means decisions that would normally be debated annually are effectively just pre-decided, right? Well, that's where the question of accountability began to emerge when I was looking at it, right? And the hearing record is where it becomes visible, right? Because you listen to people testifying, you listen to Sheriff Hall and them testifying, because what's being discussed isn't just revenue, it's allocation, it's the authority, it's that balance between the administrative and the enforcement and, the judicial branches. It's the ability for elected officials to direct funds based on changing needs, and versus a system where those decisions have already been made through structural commitments. Once those commitments are made, they don't affect just 1 year, they affect every year that follows. So the second layer to all of this is just that one that often gets a lot less attention, but is just as important, as when a portion of the sales tax is dedicated to a specific office or function. It changes the balance of power within the county government, because funding is power. The entity that receives the guaranteed funding operates under a different set of conditions than those that must compete for resources during that each budget cycle. We saw that play out today. I mean, they were in there fighting for scraps. The difference affects everything from staffing decisions to policy priorities to the ability to respond to emerging issues. And as I pointed out, there was some tension around that, right? On one side, you had the argument that dedicated funding ensures stability for critical services like public safety. That argument has weight. Stability is important. But on the other side, you had the question of whether the stability comes at the cost of flexibility and broader oversight. Because once funding is guaranteed, the leverage that normally becomes the budget process is reduced. And that's when the leverage is reduced. So when the ability to enforce accountability comes through funding decisions. That's where that broader financial picture that I discussed earlier became essential, right? Rising payroll increases expenditures, and concerns about revenue sustainability are already part of the record. When you introduce a dedicated tax stream into that environment, right, you're not just adding revenue, you're restricting how that revenue can be used, right? That's a tasty revenue stream. That 0.25% doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a lot. And that means other areas of the budget must absorb the impact when the financial pressures arise, but not that. And it comes right back to that. It brings us back to that, the public, because the sales tax is not an abstract concept. It's paid by residents every day, right? We all pay it. Pay it in everything you buy. You get taxed on your income, right? You get taxed on your income. You get taxed by the city for working and living within the city. You get taxed on everything in the county that you buy. You're taxed upon taxed upon taxed upon tax. And when a portion of that tax is allocated in a way that limits that flexibility, those consequences are going to be felt. And they're happening within a framework where certain funding streams are already committed. Now, they did frame it as small. They framed it as necessary. They framed it as targeted. But the cumulative effect of that decision is going to be much larger than it suggests. Once that 0.25% was embedded in the structure, it would shape how every discussion in the future meant. It would become part of that whole baseline. It becomes part of the expectation. Now it becomes part of the power dynamic within the system, right? Now moving forward, to use, for example, you're not using when you're coming up for an thing like they talk about now. Well, it's not a new levy, right? It's not a new tax, right? You're just renewing the old one. Well, that's how they sell it moving forward. This isn't new. You've been paying it. Well, yeah, along with the 37 other non-new ones that I've been paying. How about I'm done paying them? Because you're using it in salary for the government. Most of you are at 70, 80% salary. That's unacceptable, especially when your citizens are starving. You know, there's the issue of how these discussions intersect with that narrative that was presented publicly, right? That thing that we all talk about when financial challenges are acknowledged, but they structural decisions that limit flexibility are not fully explained. The public is left with an incomplete picture. They're told that cuts may be necessary. They're told that revenue is constrained, but they're not always told how those prior decisions are shaping those constraints. That's where the hearings that I watched online matter, because it puts those issues on the record. It shows how those decisions are being justified. It shows exactly how things that were being debated back then. And it provides a framework for evaluating whether those decisions are aligned with the long-term interest of the public. The phrase itself becomes a summary of the entire process, right? When 0.25% becomes control, it is describing the point at which a small adjustment in taxation becomes a significant shift in governance. It's describing how financial decisions translate into authority. It's all about the money, baby. And in describing how that authority, once established, influences every decision that follows. When you start to connect it back to the broader pattern that I've been documenting, and you look at it at the city and the county level, and then you start looking at the state level and Team Neo, in all these cases, the issue is not just the individuals, the individual actions either. It's the structure that action that it creates. It's the way decisions are made in Ohio, how they are justified, how they are sustained over time. Whether it's enforcement decisions at the city level, funding decisions at the county level, whether it's Cuyahoga County, people in Toledo, people in other states. Not other states, but other counties. They all look alike. The news reporting looks alike. You go to each different news agency. I know it. I'm reading agencies across the county, across the United States. I've been judging some stuff lately, and I'm reading these news stories, these investigative news stories from across the United States. And a category might have 9, 10, 12, 13 articles to read. And do you think that our problems are Ohio related, or do you think that they're internationally known? And they feel like, at least they're East Coast related, because I've read some East Coast articles that look just a lot like Ohio. We're all suffering. We're all suffering from the same problems. And it seems like it's an overall malaise of a government corruption that's gone a little too far. And that's why, people are just programmed to agree at this point. They're going to attack anyone that says otherwise because they don't want to lose what little bit they still have. But whether it's enforcement decisions at that city level or funding decisions at that county level, or the underlying question, it's always the same, right? Who's making the decision? What authority are they relying on, and how are they using that authority? And is it law? In both cases, the answer is always found in the same place, right? The record. Because the record does not just tell you what happened. It tells you how it happened. It tells you who was involved. It tells you who had a seat at the table, who was invited to the party, who got a piece of the cake, who got a little punch, who got a little tipsy and took their top off. Hopefully it wasn't one of the commissioners. But that's what allows the public to move beyond statements that they're telling us and verify. Because, no offense, but nobody takes anyone at their word, especially not in government. And that's where all that I've been doing is going to tie together. The city is going to raise questions about enforcement, coordination, or retaliation. The county issues, they raise questions about the funding, the control, and the stability, and the sustainability. And even though they seem like different subjects, they are connected by the same principle. Public decisions must be transparent, accountable, and supported by the record. Because once you start to follow the record, whether it's an email, a budget document, a hearing document, you begin to see the full picture. And once you see that picture, once the question is no longer what's being said, the question becomes whether or not what's being said matches what is actually happening, right? That brings us to our final segment at the end of the roadmap. And it's not, a headline. It's going to be a reckoning. So, before we do that, one last little break, and we'll get into our closing statements.
Oh, yes. The magical opus number one. The VA's old music. Again, it's my soothing song. That brings us to our final segment here, folks. The end of the roadmap. There's not a headline, right? It's a reckoning. And if you want to understand where this county is right now and where our city's at, you got to stop looking at single controversies and you got to start looking at the pattern that ties them all together. The commissioners are not just dealing with a strike, right? They're not just dealing with court conflict. They're not just dealing with angry residents. They're not just dealing with schools sounding alarms. They're dealing with the consequences of a legitimacy problem that's spilled into every lane of public life at the same time, right? It's like a flash flood. And this is why the newest meeting matters so much, right? This last meeting we just had is not another, just another commissioners meeting. It is the clearest snapshot yet of a county government under visible stress, where every major system that relies on stability is now either in an open conflict or quietly planning for what comes next. The commissioners keep repeating the same old core framing, and that's problematic because they're telling the public that they're trapped inside a math problem. I get it, guys. I'm not great at math, but they say that the sales tax went down hard. They describe a shortfall. They say only Washington can print money, right? That's right. Yeah, check it out, butthead. Like, I printed some money the other day. I used my printer back here. It's pretty cool. Shut up, Beavis. Only Washington can do that. Well, like that guy that crossed the river. Yeah, I remember him. Like, we learned about him in school and stuff. Well, we did until they, fired all our paras. Oh, yeah. That was pretty cool. You remember, Beavis? Like, they fired all our paras and, 100 teachers. Yeah, that was pretty cool. I think we drove everyone crazy after that. Remember, the principal, he had, a heart attack or something. He was like, oh, Beavis and Butthead. If only I had mental health professionals and paras and teachers. I mean, dude, you're just trying to kill the school. I mean, listen, the fact these people just came out and were begging for their jobs at the school district, and the school district with $1 million in salary is just sitting up there no big deal, giving out $91,000 to a 28-year-old while people that have been, when they say RIF, they mean reduction in force. I mean, they're the first to get called back when money comes back, but yay. Again, I'd much rather have you RIF your assistant superintendents, you RIF your communications director, you RIF all your upper management, and you offer them, if they're even allowed to come back at half of what they were making. That's an acceptable print for me. Well, maybe not half. I mean, look, I'm reasonable. 60,000 instead of over 100. If you can't live off 60,000 in Lorain, then you shouldn't be here. You need more than that, then you need to go to a community that has that, because we don't. Now, they describe it, they insist that there's no manual for shrinking the government, right? I would argue we understood that in loss prevention and retail. Businesses figure that out every day. And that might be pervasive or persuasive even in some way, shape, or form if the only thing that was on the table was a budget spreadsheet. But it's not. It's an institutional rupture. Its workers are telling you this is not bargaining, this is a lockout. That's what they said. This is a lockout. It is a court telling you this is not a policy disagreement. It's bad faith. You broke the law. You violated a court order. It's residents saying the levy failed because trust failed, or the sales tax, right? And when trust fails, the county does not just lose revenue. The county loses its ability to govern without force, without litigation, without chaos. Now, here's where the meeting becomes even more revealing. In the middle of the crisis about money, the commissioners, God bless these idiots,
We got Dave Moore and Riddell and little Cub Marty up there all posing for photos with none other than NEO, the Northeastern organization, and Buckeye Bank, and all these people that sponsor all these programs that I imagine are getting. I mean, well, look, I've looked at at a lot of the donations, and a lot of these people's names show up all over the commissioner's donation list. I'm not saying that's legal, illegal. People have a right to donate who they want to. I'm just saying. See a lot of ties between Northeastern Ohio organization. Again, as I pointed out during the meeting, you got an HR director and Arville, whose husband is Stephen Arville, is literally like a lead partner in like a law firm, who is the president of Northeast of NEO. And then I go to the county building. I go outside the auditor's office that's closed on Fridays, and there's awards from NEO. NEO, and now you hire an HR director who's LLC because she's an independent contractor typically, or was. Now suddenly she's our HR director, revolving door. You got Dan Petticourt going from the county to the JFS, revolving door, him giving legal advice to Riddell. Just fucking illegal. UPL. They celebrated. They got up with a banker and two guys that couldn't even stay for the fucking meeting, right? They just ran out after they got their little photo moment. They all got up there and took their little pictures. They celebrated jobs created, partnerships, and a smooth collaboration. Now, look, it's not wrong. Business expanding is good, right? But the contrast is the story. On the same day, they're praising the frictionless coordination of agencies to create around 10 new positions and retain existing jobs. That same room is filled with county employees from a union, UAW, describing a breakdown so severe that people who serve the most vulnerable people and adults and children are on strike and publicly pleading and begging the commissioners themselves to show up and negotiate. In that juxtaposition, you can hear the county's priorities colliding with its obligations. You can hear the gap between how government performs itself when it's showcasing success and how government sounds when it's confronted with the failure that it can't actually be spun away. And a moment that lands just that really should end the debate over whether it's just about, whether this is just politics. A judge and a court administrator, and Emily Kirsch. Somebody was like, I don't know who she was. She's the administrator of the courts. I know who she is because I've dealt with them. But in this scenario, we are aligned in our belief that Turning Point should not be closed. The judge comes out with the court administrator, and I do believe that they worked hard to get it. They talk about Turning Point, the 2026 budget order. You hear the court administrator say they learned Turning Point was allocated zero. And you hear the shelter is closing the next day, right? Just done. And then you hear the commissioners respond that they hired counsel. They believed that the court order did not apply to them, right? The court order didn't apply to me. Contempt, that kind of, it has, they said that contempt has exceptions to the rule, right? And that, they don't have to, have the money. Then you hear the judge react. She rejected that little narrative and accused the commissioners of moving without notice, hiring lawyers without good faith discussion, forcing the court into emergency scrambling. This is not rhetoric, right? This is a legal conflict between the institutions with written orders, written allocations, written agendas, written engagement letters, and written communications that can be obtained, read, and matched against what was said out loud. That means the county has moved into a phase where the record will decide the truth, not the press release. I just want to point out, all right, like Judge Swinsky said, the other judges are laughing at us. They think we're out here begging for scraps. They kind of are. You literally got Swinsky so fucking hot under the collar that she was like yanking her collar. She was about to leave, right? And then she comes back and was like, Riddell had to say something else. She's like, oh, hell no, right? Like, nah, I got this. Like, how dare you? Like, I feel like it's that dude in, if you ever watched that movie, Employee of the Month, and the guy up on the roof hits his car with a golf ball, and he's like, "How dare you? This is a 1982 Toyota Celica." Like, whatever, piece of shit car. But like, I just, the offense was real. They were mad, and rightfully so. Of all the things that you had to cut, it was that. Like, listen, I get it, guys. I've had my disagreements with the juvenile court. I've written my stories about Swinsky. I've even mentioned Emily in stories because they're the ones that changed the court's website to try and do something different. They lied. Basically, they said, anyway, this story isn't about that, so we're not going to get into that. I support them in this because Crossroads didn't need to go. I'm pretty sure, I think Hamilton was running that, and he really cared about the kids. And I just feel like, taking away Crossroads is a black eye to our community and our county. Not Crossroads, I apologize. Turning Point. Turning Point being the only juvenile shelter in the city. Now, when you want to take that into context, when I was at Cleveland Christian Home, it was horrible in Cleveland. There was no beds. There's no beds for homeless adults. You guys want to cut the only place for homeless kids to go, or kids that are, in domestic situations that, again, like Judge said, I send them to the DH now. Although I would argue in this one instance, a lot of the times the Turning Point kids weren't in the court system. The Turning Point kids would come out there. But I would argue if you'd have told them about it, the Judge Glass and crew would have managed to find the money somewhere. If you'd have let them know a little bit in advance. I mean, fuck, if you'd have let me know, I would have at least gone and stood in front of some stores with a can and got money for Turning Point. Like, the juvenile shelter should not be something that's cut. Give me a break. So anyway, but I will say she got hot. She told them, and am I sad to see all these different entities fighting? Yeah, because I love my government, but I'm also well aware that this kind of fighting is what leads to change. This friction is what leads to change. This friction will lead to change. But now, as I said at the end of the meeting, I was like, the commissioner's got to suck so bad. Like, how do you get people so mad at you? Like, these agencies hate these three commissioners more than they hate me. And I thought that was absolutely impossible for you to hate anything more than me. But I honestly believe, like, you got the juvenile court mad at you, you got the prosecutor mad at you, you got the sheriff mad at you, you got the auditor mad at you. Like, everybody's mad at you. I'm mad at you. The UAW's mad at you. The schools are mad at you. Shit, I get why Jeff drinks. I drink too. But that being said, let's transition to the schools. You bring forward the schools because the schools are not just, a side issue. They're the next wave. The commissioners themselves bring the schools into the meeting. And they do it in a way that tells you they know it's coming. You hear discussions about school district shortfalls. You hear the idea of revisiting the sales tax again. You hear a commissioner say that the public needs to see passion, needs to hear what money and why it's needed, and that the elected officials who did not support the sales tax before may need to step up now. That's not casual. That's the county quietly signaling that there's a revenue conversation and it's coming back. Whether people like it or not, because the consequences of doing nothing are becoming impossible to contain. Now, when you see that in real time through the people who show up and why they show up, Commissioner Gallagher points to Mark Ballard as the newly created Public Defenders Commission and praises him, or more, I think, does first. But they do something that should not be treated as a throwaway, right? They explain that Ballard is under pressure as a school board member dealing with cuts, and he says Ballard's marching orders are to get back into the community with elected officials at every level at starting looking for ways to fund the schools. And that is the marching orders, because that's what we were talking about after the meeting the other night at the school board. That was what was discussed. So Ballard's presence is not just about public defense policy. His presence is about the schools and the money. And when a commissioner frames a school board member's role like that in a public meeting, it becomes part of the political record. It becomes that the commissioners are positioning Ballard as both a participant in a county reform efforts and as a messenger who can help move the community forward in a funding solution, right? So whether you agree with the strategy or not, it's a strategy being stated on the record. And that's where Brian Baker's remarks come in and become the second half of the same story. Baker comes in and he connects the economic development and the school collapse in one sentence that should haunt anyone who cares about the long-term health of this county. If you don't listen to anything else, listen to this. He points out that the county celebrated roughly 10 new jobs, and yet multiple school districts are facing hundreds of job losses. The point is not whether his exact numbers hold up or down to the last job, which they do. It was 106, I think, teachers and others that were cutting. But the point is the scale mismatch, right? If the county's development wins are incremental while the schools are bleeding capacity, then the future tax base shrinks, the future workforce pipeline weakens, the county enters a slow drain, and Baker then frames the percentage of the population that is children and warns the county leaving them behind is not an option. It's not a sentimental argument. It's a fiscal argument. Children are the future labor force. Schools are the infrastructure of the future tax base. When the schools collapse, the county does not just lose teachers. It loses stability. It loses families. It loses spending. It loses credibility with the employers who want to invest in a place that can sustain talent. And you tie those two things together, because this is the part that hit hard, is Ballard is appointed and publicly framed as someone who is coming to help move funding conversations forward, and Baker is publicly framing the economic and demographic consequences of not funding the schools adequately. Those are not isolated moments. They are proof that the county knows the school crisis is not separate from the budget crisis. It's the next front in the same war, guys. Now, after we settle UAW, we're moving on to the teachers. That's the next front in this war. And that war is already being fought in a county where trust is already broken, right? Where the sales tax failed in a way commissioners describe as a mandate, but where public records fights and transparency fights are always framed of the daily noise, right? Part of the daily noise where courts are just lawyering up, where workers are striking, where residents are openly telling the commissioners they don't believe them. So here's the bottom line, and this is where we close the show. A government can survive scarcity. What it cannot survive is scarcity plus distrust, plus litigation, plus labor instability, plus institutional welfare, all at the same time with no credible plan to rebuild the legitimacy. When you hear commissioners say they might bring the sales tax back, you're not hearing a policy proposal. You're hearing a test of whether the county can persuade the public to invest in a system that the public no longer trusts. When you hear Ballard's purpose being openly described as going back into the community to look for ways to fund the schools, you're hearing the earliest stages of the next campaign, the next levy push, the next pressure wave. When you hear Baker warn the schools are losing jobs while the county celebrates small gains, you're hearing a forecast of what happens when a county tries to grow its way out of a trust collapse without fixing the governance collapse first. That's why this newest meeting, this last one, is some of the most pertinent information we have so far, because it shows you the county's not just cutting. It's reorganizing its alliances. It's positioning its messengers. It's preparing the next ask. And it's doing it while multiple systems are already pushing back, already filing, already shrinking, already striking, already closing, already warning. If the record is the roadmap, then it's the point that the map where the county either changes course or it starts treating transparency, negotiation, lawful process as non-negotiable. Or it keeps going and ends up paying for conflict instead of paying for services. Once that happens, like you already hired lawyers, the public doesn't just lose programs, the public loses time, money, faith that the system can be repaired from outside or without outside force, right? That's where we stand. The city is a story of retaliation and intimidation. The county is a story of control and collapse. The bridge between them is the same thing. Officials treat records and accountability as a nuisance. The system eventually starts breaking in public. And when it breaks in public, the people who pay the bills get to decide what happens next. When financial pressure meets overlapping relationships, the public has the right to ask those questions. And if you're going to say, I'm going to close this out and I'm going to hit it hard, I'm just going to. You can't just stay at the level of budgets and statements. You got to take the next step, which is the part that you're already asking quietly out there. You got to really ask that question, because what we're seeing now is not just a financial crisis, it's a credibility crisis. And the problem is it's not measured by what officials say. It's measured by whether the public can follow the relationships, the decision making, the money, without running into closed doors. That's why the issue involving Arville, the Northeast Ohio Foundation, NEO, becomes relevant to the conversation. You have a situation where an individual connected to county level operations is married to a president of the president, I believe he is, or one of them, of the Northeastern Ohio Foundation, an organization that plays a huge role in regional development, funding channels, and the public-private initiatives. And at the same time, there was questions of being raised about an LLC and whether that's a revolving door issue between a public decision-making, advisory rules, private entities operating in the same space. But, when a county's asking for more money, when it's talking about bringing back a sales tax, when it's reallocating funds that affect shelters and workers and courts, and when it's simultaneously working within a network of regional partnerships that developmental entities and public, it really has a right to understand who they're connected with who. Still you wonder who's cheating who's being true, and who's married to someone on the NEO board. It makes you wonder whose son is there and whose daughter's there and whose wife works in administration. But, whether those safeguards are in place to prevent conflicts of interest, because Ohio law is silent. Nope. Right? Silent doesn't say anything about ethics. Oh, wait, no, that's right. It kind of screams really loud about that. Public officials and those acting in public capacity are bound by ethics standards, and that prohibit using their position to secure things of value, require disclosure of what conflicts may exist. The issue is not whether someone is married to someone else. The issue is whether those relationships intersect with decision-making authority, funding streams, contracts, influence in a way that requires disclosure or recusal. When you introduce the idea of the revolving door into these whole things, you start getting a little, people start to get a little tippy because it's legal. And it becomes a problem when those lines aren't so clear anymore. So, I'm asking for records. I'm asking for more. I want to know more. I imagine you want to know more. This isn't an attack, folks. This is the standard. Right? This is the road map, right? If there's nothing improper, the records will show it. If there are overlaps that require explanation, the records will show that too. But silence, delay, and incomplete answers only deepen the mystery, the problem, and the attitude that people don't trust you, because they reinforce the perception that the system is protecting itself instead of protecting the public and its workers that are out there trying to make ends meet. So when you want to look at this with everything, right? You got the strikes, you got the court conflict, you got the sales tax failure, you got the schools looking for funding, positioning people like Ballard to have to go into the community and basically beg for funds. That's the whole picture. That's what the system looks like right now. If you guys had asked, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would donate it for a turning point. Honestly, I doubt I don't know if they would take it or not, but I bet if we put a GoFundMe together or something to fund Turning Point, if it's $300,000, don't you think that we could raise $300,000 in Lorain for Turning Point? Everybody keeps saying, "Well, I don't have the money for it." Well, maybe I can't do everything. Somebody could maybe advertise and do a GoFundMe. I'll support it. I'll sell it out to everybody, but I can't run it. These are just thoughts I have, folks. But at the end of the day, let's see how it all plays out. Because right now it looks pretty bad. The forecast is not pretty out there, folks. And so, please, law enforcement, you be lawful, not awful. The rest of you guys, thanks for tuning in. Commissioners, please do the right thing. Come back to the table and assist the people at the UAW, because it's not going to be long before the teachers are going to be striking to get their better pay and whatever. It's just going to be a cascade. Let's find a way to survive. And it doesn't mean that you guys get to keep your fancy triple-digit salaries. You got to realize where you live and who's supporting you. You want to be part of the Lorain community, you got to get Lorain pay, bro. You can't be getting $120,000, $130,000 a year. It's got to be like 60 to 80. Bachelor's degrees get 60, not 91. So anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in tonight. And it's been a long one, as always. Appreciate you. Remember, donate if you can. Also, I sort of somewhat monetize my Substack. So my Substack now has got paid subscriber levels, as well as I still put out free stuff on the Substack. But in the meantime, check it out. See if it might interest you. If you get the $5 a month subscription fee, you'll get all of my, everybody's always saying, well, where are the notes at? Where's the proof? Well, that's what you'll get with that. So if you get the story for free, but if you want the facts, the hard evidence, everything I've done, that's how you do it. Check out my Substack. And we'll get it done. But in the meantime, thanks for tuning in tonight, guys. Appreciate you. You make it a wonderful night. And hope you had a good one. When you wake up in the morning and you hear this, you read it. Remember, this was previously recorded.